We have to be responsive to our superiors. We have to be responsive to our metrics, to our deadlines. And it becomes dangerous and scary to kind of take ourselves out of that blinders position, sitting at the cubicle at our desk, staring into the screen. And to step back risks losing, all the things that are going on within that context.
For those that are just joining, welcome. My name is Rahul Didwania, and I'm joined by Gabe Crane from Woven Wings. We're here for the topic, is there all there is? Life beyond work. And we'll be talking today about what it looks like to lead an integrated life. And so I think we'll go ahead and get started. And of course, as people join, we'll welcome them in. But with that, Gabe, would love to bring you online here and just start pretty broad. What does this topic mean to you? Life beyond work.
Thanks, Rahul. Thanks, everyone, for joining for the call. And I'm excited for our talk today because this is a chance to really take a step back and look at the big picture of what are we doing? We spend all our time working, striving to be productive, make a contribution, obviously make money, take care of ourselves, take care of our loved ones. But work can become such an exhausting and kind of all-consuming pursuit. And it's easy, though we all talk about the good life and doing the things that matter, it's easy to lose sight of what that is. And we did our session last month was on burnout. And so I think this is a continuation of that conversation of now, not just how do we manage burnout in the workplace and get back to being productive, but how do we really take a step back and look at the totality of our values and what we're actually working for and where our work and our workplace environment is leading us in terms of the big questions in our life. I'm excited to drop in with you all today about this. I recently got to take a little bit of downtime myself away from work, and I'm excited to kind of reflect on that too, the power of taking that step back to do some of that reflection. But I'm curious, Rahul, thanks for joining me again for doing another one of these episodes with everyone here. And just curious, how is this topic landing for you? What are you thinking about when you think about, is this all there is? What's beyond the workplace? And how the workplace kind of works with that? And also how asking that question might actually be beneficial to what we do at work.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, Gabe, because I think a topic like this can often lead people down, a number of specific kind of less productive, so to speak, ways of relating to the topic. One might be, hey, this sounds like a hokey topic. Like, what does it mean, life beyond work? I have to work. Work is very important. And that can create a barrier where this is looked as an either or, and again, I think that what we're positing here is that thinking about work in the context of your life, thinking about what's important to you actually enhances every part of your life, including your work. And not in certain cases, most of all, it enhances your work. And so I think that's an important piece to look at. The other one is, I think people sometimes feel kind of a sense of fear asking questions around purpose, around values. I think when we were talking about it in advance, Gabe, I think there's this idea that, hey, if I start asking those questions, am I suddenly going to have existential meltdown, right? And am I going to want to quit my job? And if I do that, what's going to happen to my life? And I think, again, what we're positing here is it doesn't have to be that. It doesn't have to be that. There are ways to ask these questions, to take a step back, to reflect on the bigger picture in a way that's safe, in a way that enhances your life, enhances your work, enhances your day-to-day experience, being alive. That's really what's coming up for me is, and obviously you and I live in this world, right? Asking this question, or these sets of questions for ourselves, asking them of others, as coaches, as trainers, as mediators, as facilitators. But I think all of us can do it, and ask these questions in big ways, but also in small ways, whether it's creating seismic shift in our lives or inspiring incremental change.
I wanted to put out to everyone listening here, this conversation, I think, is by its nature a little bit more reflective. It is about inviting a more expansive perspective into your own life. If you're interested in participating in the conversation or sharing anything with us and with the group that's listening, you can send a direct message to Rahul or to myself. You can also raise your hand. And I think this is a topic where everyone can kind of be benefited from hearing other people's process. And I think I'm planning to share about my own process around this. I'm sure I'm going to try to get you, Rahul, to share about your process too. But if you have anything for what's going on in your life around your relationship with work in general, big questions you might be asking about where you're at in your professional trajectory and where that's leading you, feel free to raise your hand and add to the conversation, because I think it'd be fun to workshop different things that people are grappling with right now. Within that, I think what struck me about what you were saying, Rahul, was that feeling of fear that comes up from talking about this topic. And I get that this image of we get so stressed that we have to keep our head down. We have to be responsive to our superiors. We have to be responsive to our metrics, to our deadlines. And it becomes dangerous and scary to kind of take ourselves out of that blinders position, sitting at the cubicle at our desk, staring into the screen. And to step back risks losing all the things that are going on within that context. And so I think to start right there, Rahul, I'd be curious, like you mentioned that this can be done in a safe way, right? And I guess in your version, and you also mentioned, I think we should provide some context that you and I both live in this world. We both ask these questions. As for folks who don't know us, Rahul and I are both coaches, we're both consultants. And so we're often in situations where we're coming into outside and working with folks in challenging situations, or where they're struggling with different elements of their workplace environment. I guess, Rahul, when you think about your own experience in your work, what are some safe ways that people can start to kind of pull the screen back or take a step back and say, okay, I'm going to start asking a question or two about this, and I want to do it in a way that doesn't blow my entire work life up?
It's a great question and a loaded one. It's funny because we're talking about life beyond work. And for me, the starting point to that inquiry is actually, what role does work play in my life? Right? What role does work play in my life? And that might seem like a very non-interesting question or uninteresting question, right? Where it's like, well, I work because I have to. I work because I have to earn money, or I work because I really care about this mission. And it might be, seem like it's at the tip of your fingertips. But often what I find is people haven't really thought about that question. They haven't really connected with the role that work plays in their lives. And so they're on autopilot, as we all are, jumping from one milestone to the other. And you mentioned all the different pressures that are inherent to work. And this basic question can help us reconnect with the purpose behind what we're doing. It can be anything, right? It can be just sustenance, like it's livelihood. That's what I need. I have responsibilities to myself. I have a lifestyle that I want to maintain. I have responsibilities to my family. I have a dream down the road that I want to enable. And the first building block of that is making money. That could be it, right? That can be it. And there's no judgment or nothing wrong with that being the starting point, grounding it in what your own reality might be. Or it can be all the way, on the other end of the spectrum, which is really about work being an expression of your values. And I think in a lot of cases, we put so much pressure and emphasis, as a society, on finding work that is deeply meaningful to you, finding work that you're passionate about, finding work where you're changing the world. And it doesn't have to be that. It's more about finding what is right for you and what feels like an expression of your values today. Being able to explore that question independent of those pressures, I think, starts to open up some interesting places to feel grounded in the role or the purpose that work plays in your life.
So what I'm hearing you say is that asking the question of the role that work plays in your life is the starting point. And that can kind of connect you with a deeper perspective and a sense of purpose of like, wait, why am I doing any of this? Why why am I working in this job? why am I living the life that I'm living? And so I think that's a great first question. Is like, where is work in that broader context? And obviously, we're doing this call on Fishbowl. This is a Fishbowl live event. This is a workplace app. We're connecting. And sometimes work has these, especially when we talk about stress and overwhelm. And last month, we're talking about burnout. Work has these negative connotations, but work is an amazing place to make a contribution in life. Obviously, it's how we get our sustenance, but it's also, I mean, in this context, you see, it's like a way we make connections with other people who are working. You know, it's a big part of our social environment and our social life. And so I think that's a great question to be asking of like, what role does work play? And I think then a second question that is equally as important is, well, what is the meaningful life that I am actually pursuing? And then therefore what role does work play within that? And I think that's a question that, I mean, that's kind of a big, that's the meaning of life question that is probably so overwhelming that a lot of times we just don't have any answer for that. So we just have to, we just keep on. But I think it's a worthwhile and important question to be asking. Like, what is the life that we're trying to lead? How do we create meaning and derive meaning from the experiences of our life? If you think about that, I mean, the first things that come to your mind, what comes into your mind? And I think for myself, I find myself thinking a lot about contribution, about making a difference in the world, making some sort of meaningful impact one way or another. And there's many different ways to measure that, but still making some kind of contribution. I think about the people in my life. I think about the relationship, my family, with my loved ones, with my close friends, and I think about the relationships that I am developing there. And then I also think about just my own growth trajectory. How am I growing and developing? How am I evolving? If life isn't for learning, what is it really for? And so I look at personally, those are things that come up for me. But I think it's a question that unfortunately not enough of us ask and not don't ask it often enough, which is, what is the meaningful life I'm pursuing? And so with those two questions, you kind of have this framework for this inquiry. It's like, what role is work playing in my life? And then what is the life that I'm trying to lead to begin with? And so I'm curious, Rahul, what does that spark for you? Is we just kind of lay those kind of questions out? Do you have your own personal experience with that? What comes up for you personally? Or yeah, just where does that lead you?
I want to pick up on a thread of what you said, Gabe, which is, hey, that question of what is a meaningful life to me, it can feel very, very, very daunting, right? And I think you pointed to one way to start answering that question, which is trusting your intuition, right? What comes up first, and often points us to a number of the things you mentioned: relationships, service, growth, personal well-being, pleasure. I think a number of these things can help us, can help point us. Another way I like to shortcut an answer or a set of answers to that question is actually just playing around with time a little bit, right? And so often when we're in the middle of just in our work and caught up in that, right, it's hard to pull ourselves out of that and imagine, like, what does it mean to live a meaningful life? It kind of requires some visioning. And one of the techniques that I find really helpful is to look back in time. So imagine, instead of looking back from today, imagine yourself 10 years from now. Imagine yourself 20 years from now. Imagine yourself at 60. Or one of my favorite questions has always been like, imagine, people are giving a eulogy about you. What do you want them to be saying? And these questions can take us, just elevate us a little bit and have us, again, that's where you want to trust your intuition. Like, what comes up? What do you want to look back on and feel like, oh, hey, the last year was a win. The last 5 years, the last decade, whatever that time horizon might be. And maybe you play around with a few of those and see what comes up. And this can be a really quick inquiry that ends up surfacing or pointing us to some of these areas, beyond work. And then what happens when you connect with something like that is, one, it enlivens those parts of your life because you feel more motivated to pursue them. But the other is, hopefully it puts you into a more creative state where you can even rejigger components of your work that are draining to you, and rejigger them in a way that's more energizing, more enlivening. Find renewal by tweaking things to be more aligned with that emerging long-term vision.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, I just think, I mean, it can feel a little morbid, right? To be like, okay, I'm at my own funeral and looking back, but it's powerful, right? And I think actually what that example emphasizes is these are kind of these existential questions that we're bringing forward, and we didn't quite know how that might land within fishbowl context, but I feel it's such an important place. Where do we ask these questions? You know, work is the dominant force in our lives, spend the most time working. And so if we don't ask these questions in the space, when exactly are we going to ask them? You know, our life gets so busy and filled up with all sorts of things, a lot of which are great, entertainment, again, our families, our relationships, but it can be hard really to find those moments to step back and recognize these kind of truisms, more spiritual truisms about life, right? That life is passing in an instant, or like you blink and it's going to be gone, and that we all kind of come into this life with these high hopes and these dreams, but then, you know, life itself kind of beats us down and it's complicated and it forces us to settle or to kind of become more pragmatic, to ground those fantasies and dreams we came in with something more practical. And so I think those are narratives we all have to confront. It's part of growing up, it's part of developing a human identity in our modern world. But when you have an example like that of really being at your own funeral, of recognizing your own limitation, our mortality, that I will not be here forever at all, that can often be the ultimate motivator to make changes, to become aware, to start living your life in a different way than we have been. And it can also be a little bit stressful. So I say, like, you know, as we said at the beginning, it's one step at a time. It's finding those incremental micro ways to do this. And I think that's what I'd like to kind of open up and explore with you, Rahul, here for the next little while. Is like, you know, we asked that at the top of the call, like, how can we do this without having it turn into existential meltdown, you know, in the workplace? For the folks who are listening to this and are like, most of you are listening to this while you're working, right? And so you're taking care of whatever you're doing and this is going on in the background. How can this be something that actually filters in nutrients into your day and doesn't lead to you storming out of the office by the end of this call? And so I think that would be a great place for us to go next, is just thinking about, okay, well, how do we actually ask these questions in safe ways? And so you gave the example, Rahul, of kind of looking back. We put out those two kind of framing questions of what purpose work plays and what's the meaningful life that we're pursuing. But I think it'd be nice for us to spend some more time getting into the nitty gritty there of, how do I ask these questions in the midst of a demanding job? How do I ask them in a way that creates actually possibility and health for me, rather than rupture and explosion? And I can share some of my own personal experience with that, but I'm curious, Rahul, yeah, what are the things that start to come up for you around that particular element of this?
Yeah, the first piece that comes up for me is the answer to that question in terms of how we do this is going to look different for different people based on their styles, right? So, what I mean by that is for someone like me, I think the container exploring that question tends to matter. You know, if I want to be thinking about something deep, thinking about, purpose and values and meaning, it's not something that I would typically just be able to do, anywhere at any time. I can do it anywhere, anytime for somebody else. But if it's for myself, I like to either be in a comfortable setting with people that I know really well, where we're all exchanging stories and going deep with each other, right? As one version, and that can happen even over dinner. It doesn't have to be, some whole getaway or anything, but just something small. And often just having a conversation or two conversations about some of these questions really can shift something meaningful. Now, on the other hand, if you're experiencing burnout, if you're experiencing, even a deeper disconnection from this idea of meaning and purpose, on the other end of the spectrum, I think really stepping away from the context that's making you feel that way, taking some time off, going to a new physical setting, going on a particular kind of vacation, either on your own or with other people, depending on what works for you. That context switch and that setting shift can really go a long way towards kind of neurologically unlocking new pathways and allowing us to reconnect with our creativity, in a way that we can answer those questions and explore those questions and be able to then map what comes out of that back to our normal lives. So those are just, I kind of view those as like the bookends of a spectrum, but I'm curious what you think, Gabe, or what are some of the strategies that that you were about to share?
I agree with you about taking a step away from our environments sometimes. And I just got to do that. Personally, I've had a few weeks off. And I think there's something that comes from that kind of retreat, that full step back, that is very potent and helpful. But before we get to that, I think that there are many other ways to get into this inquiry and this conversation. And so I think those are important to presence first, because I think we often think that we have to, if we want to figure these kind of questions out and find ourselves and discover what we want to do, we have to take some time off or a lot of time off,
Yeah,
kind of a big dramatic step back. And again, like that stuff can be helpful, but a lot of like the same questions that we're confronting are still going to be there when you get back from your 6 month trip around the world, or your 8 month sabbatical. You're still going to have to figure out the different elements that make up a functioning life. And part of that is work, right? For most of us, unless you're kind of set financially, a big part of that is going to be work. Before we go to that kind of deeper reflection and space, taking space and time, I want to touch on how can we create that space and time in our day-to-day life and within the context of our workplace environments. There's three things I want to point out. The first is something you already touched on, Rahul, which is relationships and conversations with people who we trust, who we can believe that they have our best interests in mind, and we trust their perspective and opinion. Hopefully, those are the people that are closest to us in our life. Having conversations, having open inquiries with those people and gaining their perspective and counsel, I think is a great first place to start. And just seeing how are they how are they perceiving us? How do they perceive, especially someone who knows us well? Where do they read us in our current life and in our life trajectory? And so being willing to broach that conversation with people who we respect and trust, asking questions to gain direct feedback. A lot of times we're kind of shy to get that honest, unfiltered 2 cents. And so inviting that from our loved ones and people we trust. And again, having some care with our loved ones around that process. They might be the people we trust the most, but bringing up deep questions like this might have major implications for them as well. And so just being mindful of that, being thoughtful about how does that conversation get introduced. And again, it comes back to trust, I think. Who can you really trust to safely hold that conversation with you? And maybe it is, ideally it's a loved one, maybe it's a coach. I mean, that's Rahul, you and I, that's the work we do all day long, right? Is supporting people to work out tough questions that aren't always easy to talk about with your family member or with your boss or with your team members. And so talking to a coach or a therapist, and there's just something powerful that happens when we start to vocalize our experiences and what's going on inside. I just had an experience of that myself with a loved one this morning. It was like a passing little dialogue that happened in my head yesterday, and I didn't even think that much of it. But then over dinner, as you were saying, Rahul, I just remembered it and I mentioned this interaction, and I got a really powerful reflection about that little passing thought that was going through my mind. And now that's working inside me now today. And I can feel kind of the shifts and changes coming from that. Finding a place to talk and to gain perspective is just so valuable and important. A second layer past that is now with yourself. There's ways to have conversations with yourself and open yourself up to the different dimensions of this conversation and what it means for you. And one of the things that I think is really undervalued, that does not get as much play as it should, is the power of journaling, the power of free writing. If you just take 5 to 15 minutes just to put a pen on the paper, or you can also do it on your computer at work. It can look like you're putting together a really important report, and you just let yourself open up a blank document and just let words flow out. let yourself begin to express what you're thinking about when you think about all these kind of questions. And just that process of letting it go, it'll probably sound a lot like nonsense, and a lot of it won't make sense to you. You'll be frustrated by it, but giving yourself that chance to just let out the thoughts that are accompanying you around these topics will begin to, it's like priming a pump of a well. It'll start to get the water flowing, and it'll move you through a lot of those feelings of, this is so dumb, I can't believe I'm thinking about this, or this thought is not complete, it doesn't make sense. We have so much of this inner filter and judgment that's going on that kind of gets in the way of us being able to openly ask these questions. And one of the reasons I like emphasizing something like free writing is that these, again, to go back to the top of our call here, these are big questions that are hard to ask. And they're idealistic questions. They're somewhat amorphous questions. So they're not as tangible, practical, and executable as many of the work questions we tend to ask. Our critic, that filters for that kind of BS, is going to be active and strong in this conversation. And so if we can facilitate an inner conversation with ourselves, get reflection from others, we're going to be able to have this conversation in a better way. And then the last thing I want to emphasize is a cliche, and it's out there so much in the world, but it is still just so important. It's the foundation, is mindfulness. Just being able to pause for a few minutes and look at, what am I spending my time thinking about? What are the feelings, the emotions that come up for me when I ask this question about the nature of work, and is this all there is? Am I in the right place? Am I living the life that I'm wanting to be living? If we just being able to stop and witness what's taking place for us creates these moments, these islands in time, which are vital. We need them. We put our head down and life passes in an instant, right? We blink and it's over. We blink and a career of 30 years has gone by. So what are we doing if we don't have those moments in our day-to-day experience where we smell the proverbial flowers, where we open our eyes and we say, wow, here I am, I'm alive. How do I feel about that? How do I feel about what I'm doing right now? What's my experience like? What's the voices that I'm living inside? And that's what's also so powerful about mindfulness that I love, is that it takes us one level beneath that standard voice that we identify with, that is us. When we step into mindfulness, it's an opportunity to step behind that voice and to say, okay, wait a minute, like, what are the presuppositions that I'm living from? What is the way that I'm orienting towards everything and filtering all the information coming into my life? And this is just an invaluable tool. And I know it's gotten bandied around so much, and we have all this scientific research to the point where it's like mindfulness could just mean anything at this point. What I mean by it here, and why it's so vital for this conversation, is it gives us a chance to really see life unfiltered, beyond the rat race and the way that we've put our head down into our lane and we stay there. Mindfulness is the opportunity to step back and remember the wonder and the mystery of life, and therefore to start to link ourselves back to those senses of deep meaning, those senses of what is existentially important to me. And then therefore, what does work play within that context? Am I in the right place? And how does working further that and make a contribution to those things that matter to me so much? Again, talking with people in your life who you can trust, loved ones or a coach or a therapist, talking with yourself through the process of journaling, through getting your own internal process out, and then engaging in the process of reflection and mindfulness, noticing how you feel, noticing what your experience is, giving yourself that respect to take the time to do that. Some basic skills I think we can all kind of practice before we go on the 6-month sabbatical to find ourselves, right? So I'm curious, Rachel, what that sparks for you, or anyone listening, if there's anything that sparks for you you want to bring up.
Thank you, Gabe, and welcome to anyone that joined at the 30-minute mark. For all of you that are here, again, we're here for the topic, is this all there is? Life beyond work. And as Gabe just mentioned, if you have any questions, if there are any scenarios that you're playing with in your own life, any, what was the reason, right, that brought you to this particular topic? We'd love to hear from you. So feel free to direct message, DM either myself or Gabe. We'll be on the lookout for that. But as a recap, right, a recap for those that joined, the central questions that we're looking at around, is this all there is? It starts by trying to understand what is a meaningful life for you, right? What is a meaningful life for you, and what role does work play in that meaningful life? And what we were just starting to talk about is those questions can feel heavy, they can feel complex, they can feel daunting. And they might be questions you don't want to ask. What we're encouraging though is to create safety in your exploration of that question and to allow yourself to go there and trust that your life isn't suddenly going to fall apart, that you're not suddenly going to have an existential meltdown. And that some of the ways that you can do that, one, trusting your relationships, finding a safe outlet, like Gabe said, loved ones, coach, therapist, in some cases, your manager, if you have that kind of relationship with them, finding a gateway into your own mind, journaling. I'll name that today I was struggling to focus for a while in the morning and started to kind of just slow down and notice that something felt a little bit off for me. And so I just opened a blank notes page on my computer and just typed out for about 5, 10 minutes, not very long, and uncovered that I was holding on to some emotion and some distress related to some personal life areas. And just the act of recognizing that, looking at my life beyond work, allowed me to come back to my work with much more rejuvenation and renewal. And so this idea of free writing, of journaling, certainly one that can produce quick insights and quick shifts in your energetic states. Finally, mindfulness, right, as Gabe was talking about. With all of that thrown back your way, again, just going to encourage you all to ask questions, to put your own scenarios out there. Let us know if you want it to be anonymous, or rather, we'll keep it anonymous by default. And we're happy to use some of those scenarios as opportunities to explore it together as a group. With that, actually, Gabe, I did want to bring it back to you. I know we just talked about some of the smaller ways in which we can touch on these questions. What I'd love to explore with you is what happens? What are some of the possible effects of exploring these questions? What are examples of changes that can come up in your life that lead you to recalibrating your life in small ways and big ways? What are some of the examples that come to mind for you?
Well, I think that, I mean, I can draw on my own personal experiences and then experiences that I've seen examples with clients who have asked these questions. And I think the biggest thing that see across the board is a renewed sense of presence, of willingness to be actually in the question that you're asking and that we're asking here, and that it leads you, when you ask that, to sometimes making big decisions. I've seen people make career shifts, make decisions that, you know what, I'm happy in the role that I'm in, but I have always wanted to do something different, X, Y, or Z, and life is not getting any shorter, right? And that there's actually a viable pathway to me doing some of what I dreamt of, rather than this other narrative of I've got to kind of stack chips and kind of set things up ahead of time in order to be able to do that. Seeing you've got a good friend, Rahul, who has gone from working at Facebook, for example, to starting their own company in the food industry, right? Not what they expected. They were a project manager and they shifted into doing something that always inspired them, that connects them with their own family history and their own family lineage. Examples like that. I think also it invites people to think about work-life balance and think about the emphasis they place on their work versus the other relationships in their life. And I can say on a personal level, and I'm happy to kind of go into this in our remaining time, but I just had a chance to take a step back myself. And I guess it came as good timing as we were coming up on this call here at the end of this month. And just having a few weeks to step back and really look at everything that's going on. And you, Rahul, gave me this image of pruning a tree. And for context, in my own life, I have a lot of things going on, probably too many things. And I'm very grateful and lucky to be leading a meaningful life, right? I'm doing work that inspires me, that feels important to me. I feel like I'm making a contribution in the world. And because of, I don't know, all sorts of different reasons, the way that I'm wired, what I'm trying to accomplish, I just feel like if I think about my work life as a garden, it's just full. It's like bursting and somewhat overgrown. There's just like, there are plants everywhere. And I found myself just in this time taking a few weeks to step back and look at it all and really again ask that question, like, well, what am I doing? And it's interesting to me because I think probably most of us, when we heard that question at the top of this call, and as Rahul and I have been discussing it, probably the image we get is kind of this like office space kind of vibe, like some terrible job and I'm kind of just living this menial existence and I'm unhappy, so how can I change that? But really, most of us, I would hope, and I think that's probably true for folks on this call, it's like you're doing something valuable. There are important and interesting things about the work you're doing. And I certainly feel that way myself. In fact, most of the things I've chosen are things that are really meaningful. They're things where I feel that I'm making a contribution. It's a good match. Nonetheless, when I step back and take a look at those things now, I recognize that everything changes, or those things made a lot of sense for me to do when I started to do them. They've made sense for me to do them, but are they really still serving me now? And is that what's trying to happen now? And that's what I found myself really questioning and asking. I'm still in that inquiry, but I'm aware that there are too many things that are going on. And I'm grateful. Again, it's like, I'm glad I've got too many things. It's a good problem to have too many things going on. But I also have this sense that there's actually something more powerful and deeper that is preparing to come through my work life, that's trying to manifest through my work. And I'm basically getting ready for that. And for me to do that, I can't have this overgrown garden. Like it just won't work. There's not enough work hours in the day. There's not enough days in the week, hours in a day to be able to do all those things. And so there's a there's an essential prioritization process that has to happen and a pruning process that has to happen to kind of take out things. Again, they're not bad, dumb, silly, stupid things. They are valuable things, but they just might not be valuable enough or the right fit at this time for me now to make the direction and success that I'm working to create. And I think that that's so fascinating and interesting to me because in the example you gave me, right, Rahul, about pruning this tree, it's like, of course, you take off the dead leaves of a tree or you take off the flowers that have wilted, but sometimes you actually have to take off living branches, that seem like they're healthy in order for the tree to channel its energy into the crucial places that it really needs to go. Kind of a good to great sort of question. It's like, what are we actually, how are we filling our time? And is there some refinement that can happen that actually will make things go even better or might be actually really the missing ingredient to take you to the moon?
I mean, if I were to really abstract out everything you shared, and thanks, Gabe, for taking us on that journey of your own experience, right? I think really what we're proposing here is that, hey, like giving yourself the permission to ask this question of what do I want my life to be? What is a meaningful life to me? That's the first step, right? Give yourself permission to explore that question, whether it's on a retreat, on vacation, or whether it's journaling for 5 minutes, 10 minutes during a lunch break or a lunch walk, whether it's talking to friends or trusted therapist or coach, whatever it might be. It's giving yourself permission to ask that question. Why? Because if you do, it opens you up to the potential to have perspective, right? To get just to lift your head from the rat race, so to speak, to get perspective and to experience a shift in your relationship to all the aspects of your day-to-day life, the stressors of your day-to-day life, that feeling of racing 1,000 miles a minute. It's about getting just a little bit of separation from that, and you can create it in, as I said again, the smallest of doses or the largest of doses. And then from that place of perspective, the optionality starts to emerge. Gabe, you and I have talked so many times about how so many people who come to us, their problem, the problem that brings them to a conversation like this or to work with people like us, is that they're burnt out, is that they don't see any possibility, right? They're like, this is just the way that it is. Work is what it is. My manager is terrible. Just everything, right? There are too many projects. The deadlines keep coming. And so this question of, is there all there is? In that state, your answer is yes. That's it. This is it. This is my life. But the reality that we know, that we've seen play out so many times, is that if you can get to that place of having perspective, the answer to this question, is there all there is, invariably will become no. What there is anything you want it to be. And so you can take a step back and get creative about making shifts, pruning some projects, cutting out some things that aren't making sense, adding things that do fill your cup, right? Small or large. It can be anything to that effect, more incremental, all the way up to changing your profession, right? Going from being in a safe large company to starting a food startup, and there are so many different ways this can play out, from incremental change to seismic change, depending on what you need and what's appropriate and relevant to your situation.
So I want to pick up on one thing you mentioned there, Rahul, which is, as we said, this is a continuation of the conversation we had last month about burnout, also on Fishbowl Live here. This topic that we're talking about today, talked about, it's this existential question. It's this kind of broad question, and it can feel like an indulgence. I feel like it can feel like a privilege to ask these kinds of questions. Who has time to ask these kinds of questions, right? But we all like urgency, right? We all need a sense of urgency sometimes to start taking actions on something or to buy something, right? And so I would just put out a little bit of urgency to the group of you that's really listened through this whole call, which is really awesome to just be sharing this with y'all. But really, what is the consequence of not asking these questions? I'd like you to really sit with that. And I would say that there are different dimensions that answer that, but one major consequence is burnout. If we don't ask these questions, if we don't have a solid handle on why we're doing what we're doing and feeling connected to it in a genuine way, then we tend, inevitably what happens is we feel dissatisfied. We feel like something is lacking, like something is missing. And if we ignore those signals for a long period of time, we can experience burnout. And what's more is that burnout is kind of a statement about how we show up at work, or we're exhausted and we need to rest. But actually, even beyond burnout, there's something even more, which is just a feeling like we kind of missed the boat, or feeling like we kind of didn't make the best use of our time. And I think we all kind of have to grapple with and confront that. We're hosting this conversation, and I ask that question to myself all the time. And I'm not sure I'm making the best use of my time. And so that is a key question that we all have to return to. But I think the consequence of not asking these seemingly kind of whimsical, self-indulgent questions is the life not lived, is the feeling of like, wait a minute, like, did I leave something on the table? Was there something out there in life for me that I didn't actually make the space and time to connect with? And, ultimately, I do strongly believe this. I think we all come into life very much with that drive. I think it's something that is kind of innate to life. We want to do something with our life. Even if it's just it's like kind of ironic or counterintuitive. All we want to do is be present with our loved ones, or laugh, or celebrate. It doesn't need to be curing cancer or going to Mars. And it's okay if it's that too. But we want to be alive, we want to make connection with life, with others. We want to feel like we're doing our best. And these questions are the avenues towards that. Again, like there's an old Hebrew proverb about like that we know all these things when we're in the womb. But then as soon as we come out of the womb, there's an angel standing there with a sword or something, and they hit us on our head and we forget everything. And we then end up going through life and trying to kind of put it back together, to remember what it was that we knew before we were born, but when we were in the womb, when we were on the other side of life, whatever your belief around that is. And so we go through our life trying to put those things back together. And these questions are the avenues into that, because it's so easy to become distracted. It's so easy to put your head down and recognize that, look, like there's other things that I have to do. And that's also why, like, at the end of this call, I want to give everyone a little dose of urgency, because the other things are always more urgent. That's how it seems when we wake up and we have the 15 notifications on our phone. What's more urgent is meeting the demands of the day. But what's actually more urgent, when you really step back, is asking these questions, right? Is having a meaningful life. That's the most imperative, most important thing. That's so backwards. It doesn't seem that way in our day-to-day life. Give yourself that sense of urgency, that reminder that, like, hey, you know what? Today is not coming back. I'm only getting older. I have a limited amount of time on this planet, in this body, alive. What is it that I want to do with it? And far from being these kind of abstract, whimsical questions, these are the questions that really drive to the heart of life and what we are actually doing and spending our time doing with our life. So they're very, very valid and important questions to be asking. And yes, even while you're at work, or even somehow, for all of you all listening, how you are doing this while you're working, I really want to encourage you, take some time, put these exercises we've put out today into practice. Who's in your mind of who you can talk to and reach out to after this call? Can you take 5 minutes, even while at the end of this call here, before the top of the hour, and just start doing some free writing on an open Google Doc, next to whatever you're working on? Let it flow. Let these things start to actually not just be ideas in the abstract in your head, but try to put it into action and see where it leads you.
Thank you, Gabe, for that call to action. I think that's absolutely right. And when I think about something like this, I remember a quote or something, this idea that having a vision is not a exercise, it's a practice. And by having a vision, I mean having a vision of the life that you want to lead, right? And it's a continuous practice of envisioning more than it is of developing a vision. And I think this call to action to find those moments, to prioritize this, to do that thing that's important and not urgent instead of only the things that are urgent. All of what we talked about today, if nothing else, I would hope is a reminder of just that for anyone that's like, yeah, this all makes sense. It's all obvious. Just take it in and take Gabe's call of action and see if you can move it forward a little bit for yourself as we close out here.
Yeah, thanks, Rahul. And I think I just add into that is, I spoke to the ironies of some of these topics, right? It's the things are counterintuitive. That maybe a life of deep meaning means like having good meals with your friends and going to the movies and laughing. And so it's like sometimes the deepest meaning appears like somewhat meaningless or not accomplishing some great thing. There is a dichotomy in life between being and doing, right? Just existing versus accomplishing, driving to manifest something. And I think that's something we haven't talked about that too much here on today's call, but I think it's another important element here. It goes back to the title of this call. Is this all there is? Life beyond work? Work is almost always about getting somewhere, right? It's about manifesting something, it's about accomplishing and achieving something. And that is important. I think we can all be grateful to the fact that that exists to give us a sense of purpose, to give us a sense of direction and something to do. But at the same time, life is not only about doing stuff and accomplishing things. It's about just is. Life is about being, ising, like just the experience of existing. And a lot of the most kind of content and happy people in the world, they understand that. They understand that, hey, there's a time for doing stuff and there's a time for just being. I would also invite everyone just to think a little bit about that as we're wrapping up. Like, where are you trying to get to? And where are you right now? What's wrong with where you're at right now? Usually we're dissatisfied with something going on in the present. And if we look at it from one angle, there's always something wrong with the present. That's what gives us a motivation to improve things, to make things better. Life is always evolving. It's never still. And we are part of life. And so our work reflects that. We're always trying to make things better. But paradoxically, and in a complementary nature to what I just said, life is perfect just as it is. It's just right here. There's nothing that needs to be added. And from that perspective, whatever it is that we're working towards or we're seeking to manifest is kind of an illusion, like it's all right here, right now already. Like, did the industrial revolution make us happier by providing more cups and t-shirts? Maybe, maybe not. Obviously, it's improved our lives in all these different ways. Look at our standard of living, our medical systems, our what we understand about life is amazing, right? But kind of the existential, eternal presence of mind, has it changed that? Has it changed what it's like to wake up as a human in the morning and see the sun on the in the sky and shining down on the plants? Has it changed any of that? Not really. Both of these things are equally true. As many things at the heart of life, and when we get to the most meaningful levels of life, they are paradoxes, right? They are paradoxical. Just to invite in that presence with that paradox of life. Where are you trying to get to, and where are you right now? And can you appreciate what we have right here?
All right. And so if you've stuck with us till now, thank you all so much for joining the conversation. If this was interesting to you and you want to continue the conversation with us, there are two places we'd point to. One is that Gabe and I both host a podcast called Woven Wings Live, which you can find anywhere you listen to podcasts and on YouTube, where you can find more of these types of conversations. And hopefully that sparks something for you. And otherwise, we welcome you to come to wovenwings.net and to explore Gabe's work, to reach out to see if there's something you'd like to explore more deeply, to be supported through. That's another piece we'll put out there. And Gabe, I'll turn it over to you to close to see if there's anything you want to add there.
Yeah, well, I just want to thank everybody for being with us today. Rahul, it's great to be with you as always. And yeah, as Rahul mentioned, feel free to reach out to either one of us. You can find Rahul through the Kung group, where he's the head of client services. Both of us are available for consulting and coaching as well, for one-on-one transformational coaching for your work. Feel free to connect with us. Again, wovenwings.net is my website. Woven Wings Live is our podcast. And really beyond that, I just want to just wish all of you the best as you move into your day, wherever you're at. And I really hope that this conversation can spark something that becomes real for you, that it translates into some kind of action. And so on that, we love being here on Fishbowl. Perhaps we will see you guys next month as we do another call. And we'll look forward to catching up with you when we do. So thank you all so much for joining us, and we will see you next time. Take care.